There was a time when to see was to believe. That is no longer the case, at least in Syria. In 7 years of fighting there, the bombing of civilians, tales of torture on both sides, millions displaced, it's the chemical weapons attacks that have produced some of the most widely broadcast footage and the most heated debates. The most recent suspected chemical attack occurred 2 months ago in the city of Douma. We saw images of frantic rescue efforts, the hosing down of victims, children included. However, in a war involving multiple states and actors, almost nothing can be taken at face value. Arguments over the authenticity of the footage, the credibility of the analysis, the motives and flaws in the reporting have been intense and ongoing. To call this an information war is to sell it short. It's a news and information storm, and trying to navigate through it is far from easy. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the seeming impossibility of understanding one of the most contentious aspects of the Syrian war, the use of chemical weapons.
On a story as contentious as the war in Syria, where, in addition to bullets, claims and counterclaims fly across battle lines, and where numerous chemical attacks have thrown up serious questions over what evidence from the war zone can be trusted, it is doubly important to consider the source. For this story, we interviewed Rania Khalek, a journalist reporting on the underclass, as she says on her website. She's based in Beirut. Elliot Higgins, a British blogger who started analyzing videos and documents from the Syrian war in 2012. He is now often referred to as a specialist in open source weapons analysis. Christian Benedict, a campaign manager for the NGO Amnesty International. Based in London, his focus for the past few years has been the war in Syria. Max Blumenthal, a journalist and author of numerous books. In an interview, he said what motivates his work is a disgust with unfairness. And Elias Grohl, a DC-based journalist who covers how conflicts play out in the cyberspace. And consider too where you are seeing this story. On The Listening Post, airing on Al Jazeera English, an international news channel funded by the state of Qatar.
There are obviously a range of positions on the use of chemical weapons. Certainly for us at Amnesty International, we're quite clear that chemical weapons have been used predominantly by the Assad regime. There are obviously counter-narratives which are trying to say, no, chemical weapons haven't been used, or chemical weapons have been used by the so-called terrorists.
Meanwhile, American journalists who have visited the area have found no traces of poisonous substances.
My position is that we should be skeptical of everything coming out of Syria, because at the end of the day, there's not people on the ground who actually know what's happening.
Reporters cannot get into the town, civilians cannot get out. So internet videos are the only evidence of their suffering.
All we're hearing from is biased sources, whether it be the Syrian government or whether it be Western governments or insurgents on the ground who have been pushing for regime change. So we should be skeptical of all allegations coming out of this war.
At this hour, American and coalition forces...
15 years ago, in 2003, the United States, under the presidency of George W. Bush, went to war with Iraq. US intelligence agencies claimed Iraqi President Saddam Hussein had been secretly developing weapons of mass destruction.
In fact, they can produce enough dry biological agent in a single month to kill thousands upon thousands of people.
Despite UN weapons inspectors saying they could find no evidence, the mainstream news media, primarily in the US and UK, ran with the Bush administration's version of the story.
The intelligence shows, and the senators can back this up, that there are massive amounts of weapons of mass destruction hidden, buried, unaccounted for.
Those claims proved to be false. They were lies. And the US and British media, along with the governments whose lies they propagated, have been struggling to regain their credibility ever since.
It was this really seminal moment in post 9/11 history in the United States. It shattered trust in government, it shattered trust in media, there was not enough critical reporting.
Explosions, fireballs, mushroom clouds, a fearsome display of American military might.
The Iraq War, it's exhibit A for why it's so important to critically evaluate these types of statements by the government.
I cannot think of one pundit on the national scene in cable news or at any major newspaper who has questioned the drive for regime change in Syria.
He's got Russia and Iran behind him, and we want him out. So we need to tip the balance of power.
And so it's really left to a small group of journalists and online activists to really sift through what we believe is disinformation from our own governments aimed at stimulating a war of regime change.
The sheer volume of information available online about the Syrian war has been unprecedented. Videos, images, uploaded documents, witness testimonies. It has led to the rise of what's called open source investigation, which is analysis of material that is available on the web. One of the best known websites examining evidence of chemical attacks in Syria is Bellingcat. Elliot Higgins, the founder of the site, spoke with us about the process of open source investigations.
I've spent 6 years looking at chemical attacks in Syria. Generally, you're going to be looking at things like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. We're also reaching out to groups on the ground who are recording videos, speaking to witnesses, getting a kind of an idea of what the kind of emerging narrative from the attack is. Then we cross-reference that against the actual video footage. So, for example, with Duma, we had 3 or 4 videos showing the interior of the building, but we had to figure out if it was the same building. So there were features in each video that were shared. So we piece all of these together, kind of like a jigsaw.
I am not an expert, I'm not a military expert, I am not an expert in satellite analysis or video analysis, but neither is Elliot Higgins, the founder of Bellingcat. We wouldn't accept the medical claims of somebody who hasn't been to medical school. Another problem is that Elliot Higgins and his colleagues at Bellingcat are not on the ground in Syria, which means they lack context, they lack direct witnesses, they lack impartiality, they lack physical evidence.
And one thing I will say, I mean, when it comes to the use of open source material, it does in some way provide a greater ability for the public to understand the evidence. If the use of chemical weapons has been documented in a large body of real-time evidence, then that's something that you as a citizen, you can go and watch, right? And you can ask yourself, well, what happened?
However, online investigations are only as accurate, only as credible as the material they are based on. A lot of what Higgins and others rely on has been provided by the Syrian Civil Defense, a group better known as the White Helmets. They call themselves a neutral, humanitarian group of volunteers rescuing people from the rubble of buildings hit by bombs. A documentary about their work even won an Oscar in 2017. In addition to their rescue missions, the White Helmets post videos from the war zone. Their footage of airstrikes and chemical weapon attacks have been used widely by the media. Many call the White Helmets heroes.
In the face of unrelenting brutality, heroes have emerged.
They're civilians who risk their life to save others.
Others say they are propped up by foreign governments and have strong links with Syrian militias considered terrorists.
The White Helmets are not just a group of ordinary rescue workers. The White Helmets are an international influence operation. And what makes it especially scandalous is that the White Helmets have been funded with at least $23 million from the State Department's Office of Transition Initiatives, which is the regime change arm of the State Department, as well as $55 million from the British Foreign Office, and untold millions from the government of Qatar, the financial parent of Al Jazeera. And the White Helmets have participated in public executions that's been well documented. They have been filmed celebrating alongside members of Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian al-Qaeda affiliate, and they have also participated in rescuing people from under the rubble. But that's only part of the organization. This organization should be immediately defunded.
The Syrian conflict is a story where propaganda, misinformation, fake news, and denialism all meet to confuse, obstruct, and sway, often successfully. That multiple chemical weapon attacks have taken place is a fact confirmed by several international organizations. But the who, why, and how angles of these stories take time to investigate and clarify. Details often remain murky for long after the attacks are out of the headlines.
People generally have less time to read an 80-page report from the United Nations. They're going to pick up a tweet which says Jaish al-Islam were responsible for the attack in Duma, And they're going to go with that because they have a sense that that's some information that they can run with. It's easily digestible. It's like the McDonald's of information.
The Syrian war is one of the most covered military conflicts in history. And despite all the information and data available on the 80 cases of chemical attacks documented, the more we read about them, the more we're told about them, the less we feel we actually know. The cliché goes that truth is the first casualty in war. Certainly in the case of Syria, the truth, even the facts, are as contested as the battlegrounds journalists are trying to report on.